Insights, the podcast where we dive into the world of customer success with industry leaders. I'm your host, Irina Cismas, and today I'm joined by Agathe Nivet, Customer Success Manager at Spendesk, a platform that helps finance teams control and automate company spending. Agathe, I'm really happy to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
I want to start the conversation with a story. So I want to ask you, what is one onboarding moment you still remember clearly, either because it went very well or completely sideways, the opposite?
So I remember working for a company that was considering a solution for their internal operation. There were existing clients and they were considering a new feature that we were selling. And before we officially signed the contract, we ran a POC, a proof of concept, to prove the value in real condition. So I started an onboarding as a POC that was pretty interesting. And we didn't just let them play with the tool. We built a very disciplined framework to ensure the test was a success and they signed the contract. So we had different phases. The first homework phase before the kickoff, we asked the client to define their current need, their pain points. They didn't come to test and explore. We really wanted them to have specific problem to solve. And once they did their homework, we didn't give them a blank state. We pre-configured for them what they needed based on what they told us. And so they didn't have to build from scratch, but had to refine what we pre-configured for them. So they also had to do it themselves. So it was like 80 to 20 configuration, 80 from them, 20 from us. And once it was set, we also had clear deadlines because we really wanted to have a real project for them and with non-negotiable milestones to keep the momentum really high. And spoiler, it was a success because really we made through the test. They told us at the midway we've tested it, with our complex structure and complex use cases, it works for us. So the process is right. And it's a great reminder that when you manage a POC with an onboarding, you're not just doing onboarding, you're building the trust, and that secures a long-term partnership.
So basically, this story of yours proves that state-of-the-art onboarding basically secures a renewal contract, and it does the job for the renewal team if the renewal stands in different teams, or basically saves the work from the onboarding for the renewal part.
Yes, exactly. Because for me, onboarding is really a momentum because you really have to prove the value from the very first moment, and that can save the long-term relationship. Yeah.
I actually like this, and it was actually, I think indirectly you answered to my second question, because people often talk about onboarding like it is just a training or a go live on basically implementation checklist that somebody needs to do. You mentioned that for you is basically providing the value. Now I want to ask you to be a bit more specific. What is the job actually? What does the job imply in your particular case?
Yeah, for me, it's three things. The first one is to drive adoption and its real use cases. So it's very important. You're not just showing them where to click in the platform, you're helping them understand why they need the product and how it will change how they work. So that's the first one. The second one, you're supporting them until they feel the value. So you're not waiting until they finish the training. You're really here until they actually use the platform autonomously and confidently. So yeah, that's not just when they go live, I think. And third one, you're positioning them to succeed without you, so that they can do it on their own, which is pretty similar as my second point, but it's really the way they can be autonomous on their own, and they don't need you anymore. So it's not really about is do they have finished the training. It's about are they actually, is it was it worth the effort, and does this actually deliver what was promised, and is the vendor taking care of me, or are they just waiting for the next deal and moving on? I think it's the way they value the product, and the relationship you build with them is very important, more than the training.
Indeed. You mentioned the first thing that you mentioned was understanding the use case. And in order for an onboarding team to make sure that they do that, I assume they need a proper handoff between the sales team. I'm curious, how does this handover process between sales to customer success look like?
Yes, I think the worst is when the customer has to repeat everything they already told the sales. That's really frustrating for them, and it's waste time. So it's really important to have a good handoff, and it's strategic. As a CSM and a customer onboarding, I really need from my colleagues that are account executive, what is the context of the clients, who they are, what are their objectives, what are they trying to accomplish. Really want specific KPIs. We want to reduce our process by 50%. We want better process only.
Okay, so numbers so a good handover between sales to the onboarding means receiving the concrete KPIs the customer is monitoring with numbers, not with buzzwords or things that are not tangible. Okay.
And yes, and also for me, it's crucial to understand why they choose us compared to the competitors, because we know that the competition in SaaS is big, and we really need to know what was the reason the client signed for us and not for someone else, because we can to understand what they value and what they are measuring. And we also want to know the risks, because usually sales often sales forgets the obstacles had to come, because they're really happy they closed the deal. They don't really remember was the pushback, for example, on budget, what competitors they had to beat. So but for the customer onboarding, it's really important to know really to have the maximum of information, so we are not surprised when the clients tell us something very important for them. So I advise to have an handover, if possible, with account executive, customer, and customer onboarding manager.
I'm super curious because I don't often hear that in the onboarding calls why they picked you as a solution, why they pick your product versus other competitors is important. How do you leverage this information? How do you use it? Why is it important for you guys? What do you do with this information when you have it?
Because some competitors can have functionality that are different, and that we are often compared to competitors, so we don't want to know what was the functionality that was really important, and where they want to leverage the maximum, compared to the functionality that was proposed from other competitors, if that's clear.
Okay, understood. And what do you do if those information are not received, if sales forgot to provide it? Because as you mentioned, the focus of the sales team is on closing the customer, or at least in most of the companies I interact. So they are focused on closing, not what happens afterwards. So they would mesmerize, I would say, the customer into basically signing the contract. and they aren't necessarily, I would say, rigorous or careful when it comes to the other things, bringing up the concrete KPI or understanding why us and not them, and so on and so forth. What do you do in this situation when the handover is far from ideal?
I haven't had any horrible cases, so that's all right. But I think what is important is to be transparent with the customer and share that maybe some information were missed and that we will talk internally and being transparent. And then it's important then to have everyone at the table, maybe sometimes run a meeting with the clients and the account executive and the onboarding manager and see what was missed and if we need to take actions or not. But yeah, it's really important to be transparent, communicate with your colleague and see if it's a misunderstanding of the customer, misunderstanding from our parts, and then if needed, a meeting with everyone.
Okay. Early on, so let's say that the onboarding process started. What tells you this onboarding is on the right track versus this might get messy later? What are the signals that tells you on track? Not necessarily.
So I think the first thing, it's a metric, and you can see if the core features of the platform are activated. Not just are they logging in, are they doing actions, are they creating value in the platform. You can have a metric. The data is very important here, and usually it's easy to track. Second one is the autonomy of the customer. Are they doing things on their own, or are they constantly sending emails? But we want to receive email, because at the opposite, if we have silent clients, we are a bit worried, and churn is
On the table, let's say.
on the table. Exactly. Also, we want to track if we want to track with timelines. We want to check if the timeline that was set at the beginning at the onboarding are respected, and that the clients are doing what they were supposed to do at specific timings. For example, day 30, have they done these settings and these settings, and day 60, are they seeing the value already? That's the first. The third one is the timeline. So yeah, that's how I see it.
Okay. You mentioned, but let's go deeper into the metrics part. You mentioned that it's important to understand if they are starting to implement the use case into the platform. Not necessarily they are basically logging in. So, what concrete metrics do you measure in order to see that they are on the right path? How do you tie it up if they are starting to see value to a concrete KPI?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the product, because, for example, if it's about the, how can I say, it depends on the project and what metric you have determined with the data team and all of the team in your company. What are the metric that make the customer, how can the customer see value? Sorry. So for example, did they if it's a spend management, did they spend on the platform? If it's an implementation that is on a website, have they deployed? And also, if they told us that they had multiple entities, multiple companies, have they deployed only on one or multiple entities? So it really depends on the product and what they have set. But yeah, for me, the main metric is the core feature, that if they are used or not.
So it's the core feature. The core feature, is it used or not? And I think you mentioned earlier that time to value is very important. You mentioned that it's important to map the journey and try to see, okay, the timing between the steps. So it's a combination of core value, and the time window, the window of time in which they develop a particular action. I'm curious now. There are situations in which the customer just signed, and he was not expecting he doesn't know what to expect after he joins, and he realizes maybe he needs the engineering team to implement the platform, maybe he doesn't have the data to bring in, maybe, and those things impact the onboarding. What do you do in that particular situation when the customer wants, you don't have what it needs to help the customer on board, and you just wait for other things, for other teams to do their job? How does this phase look like? How do you overcome this challenge?
Yeah, usually you detect it during like the kickoff, because you during the kickoff you set the scope and see who have the ownership for what, and it's really important to set ownerships and see what are the resources from the company, from the client, what are the resources we can bring to the table. So the kickoff is really help to create the project and manage the project, because onboarding, I think, is also about change management and project management. But when it's not detected during the kickoff or the meeting, again, it's really important to be transparent to the customer and tell the customer it's not on our side to have those technical resources, for example, if I understood it was the problem, for example. Yeah, to be transparent and to remind what were the scope defined at the beginning. And but I really advise to have partnership with integrators or technical partnership with other company to propose and offer those kind of services if it's a real issue for the customer. But usually they don't need really technical background for SaaS. It's just that they think they are afraid of like technical settings, but they just need to be reassured and to be advised and help. So we just as a customer onboarding help them and show how to be autonomous and be trained. And because I am really advised to have, for example, an academy education for the education, because it's really helpful for customers. They can do on their own via video settings and yeah, do the settings on their own and at the time they want. So it's really helpful, and it helps the customer be confident with the technical side, I would say.
You mentioned the academy, you mentioned tools that basically make the customer independent and self-boarded. And you touch upon the next thing that I want to tackle with you, the scaling, how do you begin an onboarding process without losing the automation and the human connection. Yeah, how do you build a process that scales in the onboarding without losing the human touch? What's important in order to have it right?
Yes. So yeah, I think scaling is not the opposite of human connection, because we can have both. I think it's just where you put human and where you put automation so that it can help scale. So as I said, internal academy for me is really important, because you don't need a human to show a platform like over and over repetitively, where you can have very structured videos that can help customers train on their own. And but you still have to be there to build the connection, to build the relationship with the client. Just for example, with Q&A session, and you ask the customer to train on their own, and then you just propose Q&A session every week until they are ready and confident with using the platform. On the side of scaling for a team, for example, if the portfolio is growing in a company, I think what is important is to share between colleagues, because it happens a lot of time where a CSM figures out how to do brilliant kickoffs, and another one has understood how to build a good training flow, and then never tell each other. So we all losing productivity. So it's really needed to share and capitalize all the documentation, what we build, and in the same level, it's important to create a playbook step by step that are shared with all colleagues, and that can help customers understand very well and very rapidly what are their steps, what are the steps they are going to have to reach their goals. And yeah, that's how I see it.
So basically, it's about having a streamlined internal communication process into the team, and maybe standardize flows and processes internally so that everyone can share the best practice. And once a process is developed internally, make sure that this is adopted into the whole team, and it's constantly optimized and tweaked based on the input you received from each member of the team, if I got it right.
Yes, exactly. And also, what I've done in the past is meetings with all my onboarding colleagues, and with concrete example and use case example that we share between each other, and with problems we have and how we solved it. It really helps to really share what we are going through, because it helps to solve other customers' problem.
One last question before we wrap up our conversation today. If you joined a new company tomorrow and had to judge their onboarding process just by watching or listening to the first two customer calls, what would you look for immediately?
Yeah, I will really look at the code that are made in if there is 80% of speaking from the customer, 20% from the customer onboarding, because if it's only the CSM or the customer onboarding that is speaking and that is doing, how do I say in English, monologue? Is it
Yes, it's a monologue. If it's
monologue?
a wasted conversation.
Yeah, they can't there. So if it's a monologue, they can't understand really the clients. They don't have any answer from the clients, and so it will be very difficult for the next steps to leverage the value for them. And because, as I said before, I think onboarding is not about only training, it's about understanding and helping the customers reach their goals.
This was a great conversation. I enjoyed getting into the operational side of things on the onboarding and hearing how you think about the structure, the handoffs, and what actually makes the process work. Thanks again for making the time to join me. And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and mastering customer success.